It's Pentecost. Now we understand a little bit more about what this Pentecost celebration is all about. And sometimes we just, oh yeah, it's a big deal. It's called the beginning of the church because the Spirit that God promised, that Jesus promised, came to the people. Came to the people on a day that was already being celebrated, a day of celebration. That's why people from all different communities and languages were already in the city of Jerusalem. And when these people out on the street heard the disciples speaking in all these different languages, they said, aren't they Galileans? Meaning people from a different area that probably didn't go to language school. How are they able to speak my language? And they said, Peter told the crowd, because of the Holy Spirit. And Pentecost is a day to be excited. We should be excited because God's promise is being fulfilled again. Jesus had said to the disciples that the Counselor, the Spirit of truth, would come. And the idea would be that everyone would experience the Spirit if they believed. The idea of Pentecost is not something new that was celebrated. 50 days had passed since Passover, since Jesus shared with the disciples in that upper room, like every other Jewish family had done so. But here it is, a different kind of day already. For Christians, it's been 7 weeks since we celebrated Easter. Temperature-wise, we don't know that. But we do see the signs that there is new life. We've seen the tulips come up and blossom and bloom, and now they're fading away. We're waiting next week, of course, for the long weekend to plant everything because that's what you're supposed to do in Canada. But when we think about it, time has gone by. We celebrated the resurrection of Jesus, and it is during this Jewish celebration of Pentecost that the disciples, who are Jewish, received the Holy Spirit. Through this Spirit, the disciples are empowered for what they are called to do. That is their mission and gathering of the fellowship of believers, to talk about Jesus. And this gathering is first recognized as the church. But what does this mean for us over 2,000 years later? Erasmus, a Renaissance scholar, shares the story about the importance of Pentecost. Just imagine Jesus up in heaven, after he's ascended into heaven, and he's talking to all the angels. All the angels are around him. And he's sharing what happened during the time that he was on earth with the angels. The angels were singing, of course, at the time of his birth. Though he doesn't remember that, he was an infant. But then the days of what he shared with the angels are all about when he healed people, he performed miracles, when he was teaching to crowds by the thousands. He also told them about the disciple that followed him closely and then eventually betrayed him. The time on the cross and what it was like for him. And then what it was like for him to speak to Mary that first morning after his resurrection. Then Jesus talks to the angels about his return to heaven. And Michael, the archangel, says, "What now? What's going to happen now? What's the other plan that you have in place now that you're here back in heaven?" And Jesus' response is, "There is no other plan." What happens and happened in these intervening years since Jesus ascended into heaven has been the work of the Holy Spirit in the lives of people. People have made a difference. The angels were wondering what was going to happen if the people didn't follow up with what Jesus had told them and shared with them and taught them and did in front of them through miracles. What would have happened if the disciples didn't receive the Holy Spirit? Would we even be sitting here as Christians today? Probably not. The promise of the Holy Spirit and that the Spirit or Counselor would never leave those disciples was made manifest that day, what we recognize as Pentecost. When the wind came, it was really loud. When the balls of fire were all over the place. We can't even imagine it. Because when we think of the Holy Spirit, we think of calm, quiet. The first hymn that we sang is one of those ones that was written by Ron Klusmeyer, and I've been to many workshops by Ron Klusmeyer, and it's one of my favorite ones because it's got a little bit of a beat. Come, oh Holy Spirit. Now we don't often think about the Spirit moving that fast, but to touch the lives of many, many people, the Spirit does move. But the Spirit moves from me to you because God calls us to be together. What is amazing is that those first disciples who listened and received the Spirit acted. They put what they had received from God, that is the Holy Spirit, and they chose to worship and do what God called them. Right away, actually. Because we have to think, the story continues because people are saying, look at those people, they're drunk. They're all talking different languages and they're drunk. And Peter gets up and he says, they're not drunk, it's only 9 o'clock in the morning. And what does Peter do? Peter then tells the story of Jesus in 3 verses. So that the people who are out in the street, who hear the words, can understand why the Spirit is amongst them. What was it that Jesus told the disciples before he died, rose again, and ascended? What is it that Jesus told them to wait for? The disciples were told, believe. I will ask the Father, and he will give you a counselor to be with you, the Spirit of truth. The world cannot accept him because it neither sees him or knows him. But you know him. The Spirit lives with you and will be in you. And it's the same Spirit that calls us to live today. That Pentecost day, the wind came and filled the whole house where they were sitting. What seemed to be tongues of fire separated and rested upon them. All were filled with the Holy Spirit and were given ability to speak languages they didn't know. And they were loud. They were filled with hope and joy and wonder. The Spirit had come. But what does that mean for us? These disciples knew what Jesus had taught them, but until the moment that the Spirit came, they were not confident in themselves or what God would do. The disciples soon realized the importance of what occurred to them. The Spirit was there. Now they needed to act. Peter told the story. And after Peter told the story, many believed in what they had shared, and the fellowship of believers, the church, was born. The fellowship of the believers began to listen to the teachings of Jesus, to share together in the breaking of bread and in prayer. They experienced wonders and signs that they all had shared in common. They had glad and sincere hearts, and they praised God and enjoyed the favor of all the people. They heard the story of Jesus, and they opened their hearts, enabling the Spirit to enter in. They focused on the purpose of the church through worship and ministry with others, telling the message to those who had not heard, baptizing them, and they continued to teach and tell what Jesus had said. The church was born. And the purposes then are the same purposes today because of the Spirit of God. The Holy Spirit, God's gift. God did not forget his promise. He looked after those followers because Jesus asked him to. Jesus wanted his disciples to fulfill the ministry after he ascended. They didn't know how, but God was going to lead them through the Spirit. Sometimes we forget that in faith we are to let God lead us and let the Spirit do it. A little girl was visiting her grandmother one beautiful spring morning. They walked out into the yard where the grandmother had a beautiful flower garden. Grandma was inspecting the progress of her flowers, and the little girl decided to try and open a little rosebud with her hands. She took that little rosebud and she tried opening it, and all the petals fell off. and they were bruised and wilted, and they broke off. Finally, in frustration, she said, "Grandma, I just don't understand it all. When God opens a flower, it looks so beautiful. But when I try, it just comes apart." "Well, honey," Grandma said, "there's a good reason for that. God is able to do it because he works from the inside out." On the day of Pentecost, the Spirit is here in our midst. Is your heart open to receive the Spirit so that God will continue to work in you from the inside out? Let us pray. Let us offer to God our own prayers on this day of Pentecost.